All right, hey, welcome back. So once you have mapped the milestones in your customer journey, it is time to pave the path between those milestones. And here's what I'm talking about. If you've illustrated this visually, either digitally or physically, you have your 3 milestones or 5 or 7 of them, or an even number, as I said. But we've also got gaps in between those milestones. And it's important to ask, like, what actually happens between milestone 1 and milestone 2, or milestone 2 and milestone 3? Like, what is it that takes place there? Because that's an important part of the customer journey. It's actually what dictates their success or their likelihood to make it from milestone to milestone. And I find it might help if we visualize the milestones this way. So if you have a bunch of people on that first milestone, the goal is naturally to get them all the way across, to help as many people as possible make it from stage to stage, progressing through your different milestones. And even if you don't fill those gaps, some people might make it across. Some people will forge their way through Ninja Warrior style and end up at that third milestone or final milestone. But the reality is, if we aren't taking measures to make it easy and frictionless for them, then a lot of people will end up falling into those gaps, right? Slipping into the chasms between the milestones and disappearing, right? If you've ever heard the phrase leads slipping between the cracks, this is how it happens. And so the natural recommendation here is to design the solution. If we know that we have these milestones, then we also know that there are gaps between those milestones, and we can account for them. We can build a plan to make sure that as many people as possible make it from milestone to milestone. So the answer is to bridge those gaps, is to create a pathway that helps guide the prospects and customers from one milestone to the next. So the first question to ask yourself is it there, right? Do I have anything in place there? As you've mapped out your different milestones, look at the actual segment in between them and ask, what happens between opt-in and free trial? Or what happens between free trial and purchase? Or between purchase and survey? Or survey and testimonial, right? Whatever those milestones are, just start to assess, what is it that lives there? What do we actually have in place? So I encourage you to take a look and examine your current reality. Ask yourself or get together with your team and evaluate what is in place there. That's just step number 1, is, do we have something? Do we have a plan for what happens in that individual section of their journey? And then the next question to ask yourself, once you have established that there is indeed something there, is to challenge it, is to ask, is this strategic? Based on what we know about the milestones, is it taking them from the point where they started to the next milestone, right? Is it doing its job? Is it strategically tailored for that part of their journey? And how could it be better, right? What could we add to make this a more intentional or productive or frictionless experience for the customers who are ultimately going to make their way through this journey? So examine those different milestones and then look at the gaps between them and ask if they collectively form a cohesive journey. Are the stages designed with respect to one another? And what I'm looking for here is like a clear baton pass. Because if you think about, in this example, the trial experience, it's a bridge between 2 milestones. So it has 2 different ends. It starts when they request the free trial and it stops when they purchase that course. So is it intentionally picking the baton up from that free trial request and seeding the appetite for the course and then handing them off to the course? Is that bridge doing its job to bridge the 2 milestones that it lives between? And have the same conversation for each segment of your customer journey. Is, if the goal after somebody buys my course is to guide them toward a membership, well, while I am fulfilling on the course that they've purchased, am I also seeding the appetite and answering the questions that they are naturally going to have about the membership, so that when it comes time to make that recommendation for them, I'm not starting that conversation from scratch. It's already been planted and nurtured, and they're ready or have even made a decision to move on to that next milestone. And of course, I'm using examples here, free trial, course, and membership, but you would want to swap those out with whatever the milestones are for your business. And I want to call out that these gaps, right, the bridges or the pathways in between the milestones, because you now have them oriented to where they live in the customer journey, it allows us as the architect for their journey to be hyper specific in terms of the conversation that we're having. Because we know, hey, if they're here, we are doing two things. We're fulfilling on the expectation that was set for them, and we are guiding them towards the next milestone. So as you examine the things you have in place, whether it's manual interactions or automation that takes place there, you now know, hey, we're taking them from this point to that next point, and everything you design in between should be oriented to that reality. Okay, once you have established that we have an experience in those gaps, it is strategic, or we're working on making it more strategic, the final question to ask here is could it be automated? And I'm not suggesting that everything needs to be automated, but how would automation enhance their experience? For example, if I'm creating a free trial for that person who has requested access to a portion of my course, ideally, I would do that using automation so that they, immediately get their password and login information, and they don't have to wait for a human to go generate it, right? So where could you use automation to create a more seamless or a more robust customer experience for them? And automation also, it allows us to avoid some of the constraints that manual interactions might have, right? If you know that you're just going to have a hard time following up with dozens or hundreds of prospects and remembering to check in with them, well, the answer is to design an automated experience that does that for us, so that it removes the bandwidth bottleneck that humans would create if we had to do all of those things manually. And then additionally, examine the next gap and to ask yourself, is automation being leveraged intentionally to guide them on the journey we want, and to account for people who need a little bit more time? The beauty of these journeys is that you can not only create an express path, you can create a shortcut for people who are ready and want to jump to the next milestone, but you can also use automation to create a contingency plan. So think about the gap between the first milestone and the second milestone. How long does it usually take people to bridge that gap, to make it from one milestone to the other? And you can actually, mine this data and crunch the numbers, and you might find that it's a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So when you are designing your automation, you want to make sure you're accounting for the average duration it takes for people. And then I usually encourage people to multiply that, to double it or to multiply it by 1.5, so that you have some extra automation, some extra touch points in place for people who need a little more time, need a little more hand-holding. My recommendation is, when you design automation, you're designing it for the people who need the most time, right? The people who just need a little more love in order to make it to the next milestone. Because as we've discussed, some people are going to forge their way through this process anyway, and that's great. We want to make sure we've got a frictionless path for them, or a path for them, so they can jump from milestone to milestone. But not everybody is going to be that driven, and so we want to make sure that we also have a path in place, that we've accounted for the people who just need a little more time. I should call out that if you are using Infusionsoft or Keep, the milestones and the pathways, the bridges in between them, are largely reflected by goals and sequences. Now, I would imagine most marketing automation platforms have their version of this, but in Infusionsoft, it's really clear parallels. The goals are the milestones, and the sequences are the bridges that bridge the gap in between those. Okay. Now that you have mapped your milestones and we have talked about paving our paths, the next step here is going to be to dial up our traffic, is to put people into this journey. And again, I want to call out that you may already have done these steps. You may already have some traffic in place. That's all well and good. The next module here is going to be discussing what you are looking for, what we are measuring as we pour traffic into this journey.